Are you ready to sing and praise? Good morning. Happy Easter. What a time of remembrance. And we often remember something when it's either the first time that something happens or the last time that something happens. Easter Sunday is certainly the first and the last time that Jesus went to the cross and then was resurrected. And it will never happen again. For this, we should have great joy. Since that day, estimated to actually have been on April 3rd, probably about 4 AD, when Jesus went to the cross, we've been able to live our lives in the shadow of the cross. This world-changing, life-changing event happened in a time that obviously is still celebrated and recalled. And it will never happen again because it doesn't have to. It would serve no purpose. Just before Jesus gave up his life on the cross, he said, "Tetelestai." It is finished. He was saying that now this phase in the life of God's creation was done, and it was a new era. We call it the church era. God's Son went home to be with the Father, but left his Spirit here in this time and place to follow up on the work that Jesus started here. So last Sunday we talked about the so-called triumphal entry into Jerusalem, Palm Sunday, where he was briefly celebrated. But that wasn't why he came. He was highly acclaimed by so many, which he totally deserved. But that wasn't why he came. He came for one overarching purpose: to die on a cross that would remind us through the ages of the price he was willing to pay, not for his sin, but for ours. So last week we talked about how Jesus coming into Jerusalem on Palm Sunday was anticipated by prophecy 400 years before he was born. 800 years before he was born, in Isaiah 53, we can read the story of the cross and what Jesus would do, the price he would pay on the cross, and the power of his resurrection. It's all spelled out. Isaiah 53 verse 5 says, "He was wounded for our transgressions. He was bruised for our iniquities. The chastisement for our peace was upon him, and by his stripes we are healed." Isaiah hadn't seen these things happen. They had not happened yet. And yet, he's able to describe this time so accurately. Probably the most important test of prophecy is that if someone prophesies something, it will come true if they're a prophet. And it certainly did. The apostles at the time would have known much of the book of Isaiah. Some of them probably knew the whole book by heart. But we don't know if any of them were able to recall Isaiah's words, his prophecies happening just as he foretold as the week was unfolding. You can imagine later, when they had time to consider all that had happened, certainly at some point one of these men would have said, "Think about the words of Isaiah and how they perfectly fit what we've seen and what Jesus has told us." Imagine the joy they must have had. That moment when it finally sparked in their minds, occurred to them what all of this meant. And the unbridled joy of seeing the empty tomb and then seeing Jesus alive. And knowing that everything he taught them was true, was accurate, was from the very mouth of God. That's the joy we can know when we consider that morning. I'm going to read from Matthew 28, just a brief part, starting in verse 1. It says, "Now after the Sabbath, as the first day of the week began to dawn, Mary Magdalene and the other Mary came to see the tomb. And behold, there was a great earthquake, for an angel of the Lord descended from heaven and came and rolled back the stone from the door and sat on it. His countenance was like lightning and his clothing as white as snow. And the guards shook for fear of him and became like dead men. But the angel answered and said to the women, 'Do not be afraid, for I know that you seek Jesus who was crucified. He is not here, for he is risen, as he said. Come, see the place where the Lord lay, and go quickly and tell his disciples that he is risen from the dead, and indeed he is going before you into Galilee. There you will see him. Behold, I have told you.'" Isaiah had no way to know this stuff 800 years in advance, but he certainly accurately predicted it. So after Lent and Palm Sunday and Good Friday, this is what it comes down to. Go tell the disciples that he has risen from the dead. So what else might we draw from this miraculous morning, arguably the most important morning in all human history? Jesus didn't give the women who came to the tomb supernatural power to move the stone away. He'd already done it. We don't know what they were expecting to find. They went to anoint his body, thinking that the stone would still be there. And this would be a large stone, not just some rock. They certainly weren't expecting to find an empty tomb. But as in all things, Jesus goes before us in any task, and he's already moved the stone away. And that alone would have been cause for a lot of questions and doubts, but as so often happens, Jesus had already had the story written in truth, and it was written in prophecy. And as if he hadn't already done enough, he made sure that there were plenty of witnesses to his resurrection. The faith of his close followers might not be enough to prove the truth of the story to history if only the people very closest to him had seen him. So he stayed around and allowed himself to be seen by hundreds of people, verifying the truth of all that was reported. Just like last week's story of the triumphal entry, all four Gospels tell the story of the empty tomb. This is arguably the most important point in all of history. When Jesus died on the cross, and then for us, when the tomb was empty. The price was already paid. Salvation was possible as Jesus dies on the cross. Jesus had said, "It is finished." But how much more would we believe if he actually proved to us that he conquered death, proving once and for all that he was the Son of God, the Messiah, the only way that we might be offered salvation. Mark 16 has a little different perspective on the story. We see Mary, the mother of James, Mary Magdalene, and Salome arrive at the tomb, hoping to anoint Jesus, trusting that somehow they'd be able to see this large stone rolled away. What they found was an open tomb with an angel inside, and he says, "Don't be afraid, he is risen." We see the same accounting. But possibly because they were women, because it was a very misogynistic time, the men didn't believe them. Of course, part of that is probably because it seems so unbelievable. They saw him die. But once again, Jesus made sure that we would know that it was all true. He had conquered death, and everything, and told them over their years together was true. Everything he had told them was true because he was the Son of God. Luke 24 tells us that there were two angels, and they asked the question, "Why do you seek the living among the dead?" What a great question. They might have answered, "Well, we weren't seeking the living because we saw him killed. We buried his body." And then maybe there's a moment of clarity. He was dead, but he's alive. He is risen. Later, Jesus encounters men walking along the road and says, hey, what are you guys talking about? And they don't recognize him at first. So they proceed to tell him the story of all that's happened. But they obviously still don't really believe. So Jesus says to them in verse 25, "O foolish ones and slow of heart to believe in all that the prophets have spoken." Jesus himself is exclaiming that the prophets have foretold all of this. He says, "Ought not the Christ to have suffered these things and to enter into his glory?" And then he teaches them or reminds them of all that he'd taught during his time among them. So these guys go back to Jerusalem and tell the apostles and everyone who's with them what they saw and heard. And then Jesus himself appears. And they still have trouble believing. So he asks for some food so that he can eat some food in front of him, proving that he has come back to life. He's not just a ghost or a spirit. He's come back to life. So he doesn't go through all of this for his sake. His work is done. He does it for our sake, that we might have enough evidence to make a rational decision about what we believe happened. In all, Jesus appeared to over 500 people alive. You know how he did that? He is risen. So finally, let's hear what my favorite author, Dr. Luke, has to say, because he wasn't among the apostles, so he was reacting to this much the same way as we might today. Acts 2. And this is in Peter's first sermon. Pretty good sermon. And starting in verse 22, Peter says he's talking to the general populace. And he says, "Men of Israel, these words Jesus of Nazareth, a man attested by God to you by miracles, wonders, and signs, which God did through him in your midst, as you yourselves also know, him being delivered by the determined purpose and foreknowledge of God, you have taken by lawless hands and have crucified and put to death, whom God raised up, having loosed the pains of death, because it was not possible that he should be held by it. For as David says concerning him, I foresaw the Lord always before my face, for he is at my right hand, that I may not be shaken. Therefore my heart rejoiced and my tongue was glad. Moreover, my flesh also will rest in hope. For you will not leave my soul in Hades, nor will you allow your Holy One to see corruption. You have made known to me the ways of life. You will make me full of joy in your presence." Once again, all of this was prophesied. Zechariah, Isaiah, here we see the words of King David. It was proved out so that it could be verified historically, accurately. Some people say it takes a leap of faith to believe that Jesus lived and was who he said he was and did what he said he would do. I would argue, and I think accurately, that To believe that there was a man named Julius Caesar requires a bigger leap of faith. There is more written information, evidence from different sources from Jesus' time to prove that Jesus existed. More evidence than there is from Caesar's time to prove that Caesar existed. The same kind of evidence they use to prove out any historical fact. Believing anything from the past requires faith. But Jesus went to great lengths to prove that he lived, he died. He said in 3 days he would rise. Great song lyrics. He did, and he's alive. How could he do all this? He is risen. And as he prepared to return to heaven, he gave us our instructions. In Acts it says, "Let all of the house of Israel know assuredly that God has made this Jesus whom you crucified, both Lord and Christ." Matthew 28 says, "Go therefore and make disciples of all the nations." In Mark 16, Jesus says, "Go into all the world and preach the gospel to all creation." So after today, kind of the celebration is over. And Jesus is saying, now it's time to go do the work. Tell the world he is risen. God intentionally didn't leave us a lot of things to worship because he knew that we might start to worship the things rather than God the Father and the Son who came to die for us. But he did leave us the cross. And he left us these long foretold stories, these prophecies. He left us the proof that Jesus was who he said he was. So this morning, a time of great celebration and looking into the next phase of the story when he will come again. How will he do that? He is risen. Happy Easter. Let me pray. Father, thank you for proving to us that we can trust and believe, have great faith in all that Jesus brings us, the joy that he brings us into our lives, and the joy we can have looking forward to the next life, knowing that it'll be even better than this one. The joy of coming to live someplace without tears, without pain, without wars, without agony, without politics. Father, what a great blessing. We thank you for the whole story, all the way from the triumphal entry to the cross, and now to the empty tomb. And we thank you that we can joyfully say this morning, he is risen. And in his name we pray. Amen. Have a good day.